Hi, David Mould here. On July 13th, 2025, we published a newsletter entitled A New GC President and More. Because it was restricted to the 400 or so people who open our newsletters every week, and because the shift in leadership has sparked so much interest, I believe we should make the high points of this newsletter into a video which can be uploaded to YouTube and made accessible to the 20+ million persons who call themselves Seventh-day Adventists. It's been almost 2 months since the Roman Catholic Church elected her new Pope, Leo XIV, and barely a week since the Seventh-day Adventist Church elected her new General Conference President, Erton Kohler. While we wish them both well, my mind this morning is more on the latter. In fact, I may as well say it now. Pastor Kohler's election pointedly reminded me of a conversation I had decades ago with the former president of the South Central Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, Pastor Charles Edward Dudley. Where were we? Probably at some meeting where I was making a presentation before his retirement in 1993. And then again, it could have been while he was writing his book, The Genealogy of Ellen Gold Harmon White, which I believe he mentioned in passing. A church historian, Pastor Dudley's first book was Thou Who Hast Brought Us, The Development of the Seventh-day Adventist Denomination Among African Americans. He may have been compiling his material for years, but having served as South Central's president for a record 31 years, it's not surprising that he should only have found the time to write it all down after he left the hustle and the bustle, not only of running that conference, but after the not-so-subtle temptation of repeated calls to come up higher to the union or the division. I found Pastor Dudley an amiable man, a man with whom I shared an only slightly observable trait, but still was a bit surprised when that day he matter-of-factly told me words to this effect. Mould, there are two main competing factions in this church, the Americans and the Germans. Implied, behind the scenes, two factions vying for power, for control. With that under my belt, you can perhaps understand why I wasn't the least bit surprised at the name that surfaced last week at the end of the church's deliberations over the office of president. Köhler, like Falkenberg, is a German name, yes, but why come to us via South America? According to Dr. Google, German migration to Brazil began in 1824 with the arrival of the ship Argus carrying around 280 German immigrants. To be sure, there were other waves of German immigrants to Brazil. One such consisted of those who arrived after World War II, courtesy of the Vatican's rat lines. These, smuggled away from Nuremberg and almost certain death sentences, married, settled down, had children of their own, or sent for their families in Germany and became part of the lively fabric of South America. From the day I first read about it, this latter wave of German migration, which helped swell the Brazilian numbers in 1970 to roughly 250,000, that proved fascinating to me. Come, let me tell you a story. I then went on to tell our audience a story about our deceased son, Jonathan. You want to hear it? All right? Reading again. In the 1990s, when our deceased son, Jonathan, was but a child, he attended a Seventh-day Adventist school and had a teacher with the same last name as the alias used by one of the Nazis' most wanted fugitives. What raised my eyebrows was the fact that they both were from the same South American country. Was this teacher of Jonathan's his daughter? Though that little tidbit intrigued me, I left it where it was. If she'd been the daughter of this former Nazi, then that was no fault of hers. Children are not held guilty for the sins of their parents. All this came to mind when I first heard the name Erton Kohler. Whatever his family tree may look like, whichever wave of German immigrants his parents or grandparents may have been a part of, I'll be praying for him. For one, I actually liked what I heard when I went to YouTube to listen to his first words as General Conference President. In fact, I liked them a lot. I liked what I saw of his family, and I liked his emphasis on Friday night worship. In spite of this, though, I couldn't help thinking of what God's servant said more than once about the General Conference no longer being the voice of God. Consider these words, won't you? In this quote, Mrs. White mentions her third son, W.C. White. Here it is. I have had conversation with W.C. White. He was presenting before me the necessity of our people heeding the voice of the General Conference. Then I said, WCW, it is time you should understand that notwithstanding the opinion that has prevailed, the General Conference so-called is no longer the voice of God. It has become a strange voice, and they are building strange fire. God does not speak through them. The work that is being done in the General Conference is a strange work. That's Mrs. White from her 1894 Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 9. Elsewhere she wrote this. It has been some years since I have considered the General Conference as the voice of God. That's Manuscript Releases 17:216 in 1898. Here's another. That these men should stand in a sacred place to be as the voice of God to the people, as we once believed the General Conference to be, that is past. That's from the General Conference Bulletin, April 3rd, 1901, page 25. So something happened to the church back in Ellen White's day that caused her to say the General Conference no longer spoke for God. How far have we drifted since then? That we have to better minds than mine to compute, quite frankly. My concern this morning is that added to the characterization of the General Conference given by Mrs. White above, we might have in our day a faction of German South American brethren who could be quite conflicted, torn between loyalty to the church that helped their parents and grandparents, that's the Roman Catholic Church. That church helped them escape justice at Nuremberg, and torn between them and loyalty to the professed remnant, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, whose theology condemns their benefactors. You understand what I'm saying? May God give Pastor Köhler and all who might be impacted by this dilemma backbone and integrity sufficient for their respective tasks. May they have courage to open their mouths and to call a spade, and most importantly to oppose the Antichrist whenever he is uncovered, wherever he is uncovered, be it at the White House or Silver Spring, to open their mouths as vehemently as commanded by Jeremiah, who wrote this. Put yourselves in array against Babylon round about, all ye that bend the bow. Shoot at her. Spare no arrows, for she hath sinned against the Lord. That's Jeremiah 50:14. But Brother Mould, some will say to me, isn't that very strong language? Yes, it is. And while his words, Jeremiah's words, pertain to the original Babylon, they apply with as much force to spiritual Babylon, who has her agents well planted, of all places, within the Seventh-day Adventist Church itself. Unless you think this is some conspiracy theory, let me turn again to Volume 1 of the Testimonies, to a dream Mrs. White records in Volume 1, page 577 and 578. I've shared this before in other videos. I'm doing it again because I think most Seventh-day Adventists have no idea that this dream or her record of this dream exists. Here she is. That night I dreamed that I was in Battle Creek looking out from the side glass at the door and saw a company marching up to the house. Battle Creek is where the headquarters of the church was then. 2 and 2. They looked stern and determined. I knew them well and turned to open the parlor door to receive them, but thought I would look again. The scene was changed. The company now presented the appearance of a Catholic procession. One bore in his hand a cross, another a reed, And as they approached, the one carrying a reed made a circle around the house, saying 3 times, "This house is proscribed. The goods must be confiscated. They have spoken against our holy order." Terror seized me, and I ran through the house, out of the north door, and found myself in the midst of a company, some of whom I knew, but I dared not speak a word to them for fear of being betrayed. I tried to seek a retired spot where I might weep and pray without meeting eager, inquisitive eyes wherever I turned. I repeated frequently, "If I could only understand this, if they will tell me what I have said or done." I wept and prayed much as I saw our goods confiscated. I tried to read sympathy or pity for me in the looks of those around me, and marked the countenances of several whom I thought would speak to me and comfort me if they did not fear that they would be observed by others. I made one attempt to escape from the crowd, but seeing that I was watched, I concealed my intentions. I commenced weeping aloud and saying, "If they would only tell me what I have done or what I have said." My husband, who was sleeping in a bed in the same room, heard me weeping aloud and awoke me. My pillow was wet with tears, and a sad depression of spirits was upon me. That's volume 1 of the Testimonies, page 578. What I'm saying this morning is this, that the organization which had so many tuned in, watching eagerly to see if Elder Ted Wilson would retire or retain his position as General Conference President, is profoundly ridden with Vatican agents. That's what the dream said. In addition to this dream, let me give you 4 reasons why I say this. The first thing I need to repeat to you is what Elder Wilson told me personally about there being no king at the General Conference, but that the General Conference is run by committee. The year he told me that was 2010. I had traveled to the General Conference to meet with Elder Wilson, not about Vatican infiltration, but about something else. Let me tell you what happened. We met. I started off by talking to him about that $100 million gift. Asked him whatever happened to it. I wasn't supposed to have known about it, but I asked whatever happened to it. You could see him sort of turning a little bit red. And he basically, because I said to him, I didn't read about any colporteurs or any getting bicycles or car loans or any teachers getting a raise. What happened to all that money? He said, "Brother Mole, there's no king at the General Conference." In other words, they did, and he did, what the committees voted should be done with that money. That's one thing that struck me back in 2010 when we met, which was 2 weeks before he was elected General Conference President. The second thing that has struck me about this whole shenanigan, the General Conference, is this. I know Ted Wilson loves the great controversy, but he had to push the great hope instead. And that bothered me. I suppose his sense of loyalty to the committees meant he did what he was told. That's a General Conference President. It sounds more like a puppet to me. The third thing that has me a little bit rattled this morning, and the third reason why I will continue to be a bit of a dissident in the Seventh-day Adventist Church is this. September 17th, 1981, in the pages of the Review. The Review printed, the article was written by attorney Warren Johns. The Review printed that if the Seventh-day Adventist Church were put in the Fortune 500, they would rank in the top 50. And I had a hard time swallowing that. Requested an interview or an appointment with the editor for the Review. At the time he had shifted jobs. He was now the head of the White Estate. That's Elder Kenneth Wood. And I sat down with Elder Wood as a layman, a member of the church, and I expressed myself. Elder Wood, your paper has just printed the fact that if the Seventh-day Adventist Church were put in the Fortune 500, we would rank in the top 50. Where is the emphasis on evangelism if we have all this money? What is being done with all this money? And Elder Wood kind of said to me, he tried to laugh it off and said it's not billions, because I told him it had to mean assets in the billions. But I said, Elder Wood, you're not talking to a fool. You don't get into the Fortune 500 top 50 with a mere few million. And then he said this. He said, Brother Mold, I'm sure if the brethren agreed and believed as you do that Christ was coming as soon as you think he's coming, they would dispense with some of this money. That's what he said. It took me a whole day to grasp what he was saying, which was in essence that the brethren at the head of the church do not believe, as I believe, that the return of the Lord is imminent. So that's something that I've had, why I continue being a dissident in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Because I believe that with all the money, and it's said to be reserves in the billions of dollars, nobody seems to know how many billion. It just seems to me that the church is missing opportunity after opportunity to warn this planet about what is coming. That's the great controversy and the end time events we say we believe. But the other thing that rattled me was after meeting with Elder Wood, I don't know if it was months later, but I requested a meeting with the head of the North American division at the time, which was Elder Charles Bradford. He was having a meeting with some of the regional conference presidents on board the Queen Mary. And I met with them and I raised the same issue. And Elder Bradford basically said he would form a committee to look into my concerns. And like a fool, I believed him. Waiting to hear something from some committee. It's been maybe 40 years. I haven't heard a word. They probably just laughed themselves off at this overzealous layman, But there's more. We put out 2 videos that I think I would point you to this morning. One was done with Lincoln Steed, who was the editor of Liberty magazine at the time. It was called More Than Waco was the series, and this one was had to do with Time magazine, and you can watch that for yourself. And I put out another one called Am I Cursed? There we document what the church did to block everything that I attempted to do in terms of bringing the great controversy to the public in 1990 in the pages of Time magazine. I'm not going to rehash everything here, but I was slandered. I had letters sent from pulpits all over, read from pulpits all over North America, condemning this David Mould and his Time magazine thing. One of them in Texas carried the headline, Fraudulent Ad Campaign Spurned by Church. So I know what it is to have the General Conference and the leadership of the church who profess to believe Christ is coming and who profess to believe in the great controversy. I know what it is to be shamed by them, to be hurt by them. To this day, there's not been a word of apology, not a dime of restitution. We lost millions of dollars in donations. You can watch the video for yourself. But as a result, I've refused to return tithes to the Seventh-day Adventist Church for 35 years. Over 35. It was about 1990, I think, that I stopped. I returned my tithe to pastors like the one who I'm going to tell you about today. This is a pastor in Jamaica, and I heard the story from him. He tells the story of a conference president who apparently had a beef with a local layman who ran a vegetarian restaurant. And this conference president gathered up his workers one day and told them that they were not to eat at the restaurant of this layman who was by the name of Pike. Don't eat at Brother Pike's restaurant. Whereupon this particular pastor, whom I have sent some of my tithes to from time to time, this particular pastor stood up in that meeting and said, Brother Pike is my friend in the day. He will be my friend at night. And you don't tell me where to eat. Now that's a man with backbone. That's the kind of man who will get my tithe, who is not a yes man, who is not a puppet, not a lackey, but backbone, knowing his role as a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, and who knows when conference presidents are overstepping or stepping past their bounds. As a friend of mine would say, that conference president flew past his nest. But one man was bold enough to stand up and say, you don't tell me where to eat. Who you think you are? The other item that I'd bring up this morning as to why I am who I am. I'm a member of the church, but I don't return tithe to the church. I refuse to return tithe to the church. Is something Conrad Vine shared in a video which I'll put up on your screen. When asked by a young man about why delegates to the recent General Conference session were as afraid as they were to come on camera to make points, Vine, well, I'll let you listen to him for yourself, but he basically said it's a rigged setup where the church has, it's supposed to be 51% minimum of lay people on the nominating committee, but the way they've rigged things is that they consider church employee, you listen to it for yourself.
While I was in the delegates, while I was there, I noticed something very interesting. When I would ask questions or ask them, hey, would you like to do an interview and talk about something? They would be so nervous and they would not want to talk about it. They'd be either so scared, they'd just be like with their eyes wide and say no comment, or they'll run away, or you know what I mean? They'll just try to escape the question. And I want to ask you, why do you think most delegates choose not to speak boldly for truth during key moments, and why do they run away from questions most of the time?
When you look at the list of delegates, theoretically about 51% of the delegates must be lay people. But the way that the Constitution defines lay people is pastors and church teachers and educators and other church employees. So in reality, the vast majority of people in the General Conference session as voting delegates are church employees one way or the other. And they all know that if they stand up against go against the tide, that their futures are on the line. Essentially, they're a captive market. And so nobody is going to vote for a motion that they believe in if it's going to endanger their career, their children's education, their healthcare or education benefits, or their retirement plan. And so for this reason, when the delegates come together, the overwhelming majority are church employees one way or the other. Most people are voting with the flow because they don't want to stand out. They don't want to stand up and be counted. They don't want to be known as a troublemaker. I spoke out in 2022 before coming to the GC session, and the GC ADCOM, under the leadership of Elder Ted Wilson, voted me out as a delegate. I was cancelled as being a delegate. Jonathan Zirkle, an experienced religious liberty attorney, spoke up in 2022 as a delegate at large, and he's no longer a delegate in 2025. And so people see this, and both of us have faced much more severe problems since 2022 onwards as well. And so most of the delegates are essentially voting to keep their salaries and benefits packages, and they're showing that they are trustworthy, that if you can be trusted to vote the right way, then you maybe get a promotion from conference to union, or union to division, or division to GC level. And so people are voting for their careers. They're not voting on the merits of the individual motions.
But with that kind of rigged setup, calling itself a general conference election, how can I, in a clear conscience, I wasn't born yesterday, on rubber stamping committees, I can't support that. Sorry. But anyway, going back to Pastor Kohler, the reason that I have raised these issues and some of the issues pertaining to the man of sin, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, that's the Vatican and Project 2025, Pastor Kohler and his team will need to speak clearly. And what is taking place in America today is, if this is precisely what Ellen White was referring to in the quote I'm going to give you, he will need to speak clearly. Listen to her. The Roman Church is far-reaching in her plans and modes of operation. She is employing every device to extend her influence and increase her power in preparation for a fierce and determined conflict to regain control of the world, to re-establish persecution, and to undo all that Protestantism has done. That's Great Controversy 565. I believe this is what Malachi Martin was referring to. What he referred to in this book here, The Keys of This Blood. The situation we're seeing in America today, where Malachi Martin basically boasted that the Vatican, the aim of the Vatican was to come out winner of this three-way competition between the Soviet Union, America, and Rome as to who would end up being the ruler of this planet, shall we say. In this book, he gives us a look at the competition, and this is not some flake writing. Malachi Martin was somebody who was a secretary to Cardinal Bay, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, somebody who worked in the Vatican. He's telling you what's going on or what was going on in the Vatican in 1990 and 1992, that the church has plans to come out on top of this three-way competition. You know what he's saying? The Soviet Union has to crumble and so must America. I believe what we're seeing with Project 2025 is the Vatican at work. It's primarily, from what I can tell of its leadership, stacked with Catholics and Catholic thinking. I believe America today is in the clutches of the Vatican. Now, I'm going to read you something that President Trump, at the time he was candidate, Trump requested of Christians to get out and vote for it. It was at a particular convention, but here are his words when he was candidate Trump the second time. He said this: Christians, get out and vote. Just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. You know what? 4 more years, it'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. No, I'll tell you what that quote tells me. If President Trump is to be believed, and I think he blurted it out, I think he said something he should not have said. What he's saying is that there must be some movement afoot to undo our Constitution, to undo the necessity for voting. I've written about it in our newsletters. I've had reason to go back over the process that brought Adolf Hitler to power, the role of the Vatican in bringing Hitler to power. John Cornwell wrote about it in his book, Hitler's Pope. I've written about the Reichstag fire, Pius XII, and the rise of Hitler. I've written about the rat lines. Let me just close with this section here. What I'm trying to say is the circumstances being faced by Pastor Kohler and his team are not ordinary. And we need a general conference that is going to have to make a decision whether they're going to just go along and toe the line just like others are, or whether they're going to speak up and let loose the church's money. I don't see Pastor Kohler doing it by himself. Nothing short of an outbreak of leprosy in the camp is going to cause these so-called men of God to get their clutches off of the resources of God's church and to turn it loose in advertising or in evangelism. Nothing short of something supernatural. But let me close with this quote. God's word has given warning of the impending danger. Let this be unheeded, and the Protestant world will learn what the purposes of Rome really are only when it is too late to escape the snare. She, that is the Vatican, is silently growing into power. Her doctrines are exerting their influence in legislative halls, in the churches, and in the hearts of men. She is piling up her lofty and massive structures in the secret recesses of which her former persecutions will be repeated. What she's saying is that these structures have their dungeons and there her persecutions will be repeated. That's what Ellen White said God showed her. Stealthily and unsuspectedly, she is strengthening her forces to further her own ends when the time shall come for her to strike. All that she desires is vantage ground, and this is already being given her. We shall soon see and shall feel what the purpose of the Roman element is. Whoever shall believe and obey the word of God will thereby incur reproach and persecution. That's this book, Great Controversy, page 581. You'll understand why I feel it for Pastor Kohler. You're going to have to make some strong decisions, my friend, or my elder. Strong decisions. Either you're a plant of the Vatican yourself, or you're a legitimate Seventh-day Adventist and you need to hit the bull head on. Finally, in the Supreme Court removing the guardrails and in Project 2025, I believe we are seeing the Roman element with our own eyes. The question is, will Pastor Kohler and the General Conference have the backbone? I used different words in the beginning, but I said that's too strong for this program. It begins with B though. Will the pastor and his leaders have the backbone to meet it? If they don't, you can rest assured God has a people who will Go read page 506 of 606 of the Great Controversy. You'll see who God is going to use in the closing day. The church may be busy playing church, playing politics, but God has a people who will stand. God has a people who will be fearless. And I would like to believe that our little ministry has a little part to play in it. That's where I leave this talk today. Elder Kohler, pray for him. I'm praying for him. I may not return tithes to the structure, but I'm a Seventh-day Adventist to the core. I'm praying for him. He who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Amen.
When we made the telecast about Pastor Köhler and the General Conference election, we paused the work we were doing in our major production entitled Köhler the Great and the Prophecy of Daniel 9:25. Köhler is the Persian or Iranian name for the king called Cyrus in the Bible. Part of this project involves us taking cameras to Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, and if we can afford it, to the source of the Euphrates in Turkey. Can you help us? We're trying to raise a minimum of $30,000 to complete it. If the video you've just watched has resonated with you, then please consider a thank offering in return. No gift will be too small. God bless you.